Welcome to the Space Jam. Hey all, what is up? Reese here, and I've got a brand new sneaker pickup to show you. What we're looking at today is the Air Jordan 11 Retro in black, Concord, and white. These released on Saturday, December 10th, 2016, with a retail price of $220. Now, of course, as we all know, this is the Space Jam colorway. This is the shoe and the colorway that Michael Jordan wore in the game versus the Monstars when the Toon Squad actually ended up winning in the movie Space Jam. Nike has really been pushing that theme pretty hard this year because it's the 20th anniversary of the movie. We've seen this pair release, the Air Jordan 9 in the Chicago colorway that was also featured in the movie, and there have also been plenty of other shoes just inspired by this colorway. As far as this particular shoe goes, Nike has really been pushing how much it matches the OG shoe that Michael Jordan wore in the movie. Things like the patent leather cut, some of the colors and different things, they really tried to make as true to that OG form as possible. However, there is one pretty significant difference, and that of course is the 45 at the heel. In the movie Space Jam, the shoe Michael Jordan wore actually had a 23. Now that does not mean that this shoe is not true to OG form, however. With the 45 on the heel, this is actually incredibly accurate to a playoff PE that Michael Jordan wore in the 1995 playoffs. Before we get into the close-up review of the shoe, let's go through a quick history lesson and talk about that 45 PE. Let's take a quick step back from the 1995 NBA playoffs. Before the 1993-1994 season, Michael Jordan actually ended up retiring from the sport of basketball. He went on to play baseball for a little while, but as we all know, that retirement was not permanent, and he returned to the Chicago Bulls near the end of the 1994-1995 season. He helped stabilize the team that had had a pretty iffy record. I think he was back for 17 regular season games, and they won 13 of those, which was enough to propel them to the playoffs. They made it all the way to the Eastern Conference semifinals, and at some point before that series started, Tinker Hatfield showed off what he'd been working on the next Air Jordan shoe to Michael. He ended up giving him a sample in Michael's size of 13 in what we now know as the Concord colorway, and Michael loved the shoe. He really wanted to start wearing it right away, but Tinker and Nike did not think that was such a good idea just because the shoe wasn't actually going to be released to the public until the end of 1995. So they didn't want to create demand for something that they couldn't sell for months. Regardless, Michael ended up wearing the shoe for the playoff series. Now, when he had returned to the Bulls, he actually was wearing the number 45. His 23 jersey had been retired when he retired the first time, and so he just picked up the 45, which has been what he wore with baseball. So, that very first PE that he rocked versus the Magic of the Concord colorway of the Air Jordan 11 featured the 45 at the heel. He wore those for 2 games, but ended up getting fined $5,000 both games because they did not match with the colors of the shoes the rest of his teammates were wearing. They were all wearing darker shoes with a lot more black, hits of red, things like that. So it's unclear whether Nike knew that ahead of time and was just scrambling to put together another colorway, or if they had to, after the fines, really scramble to put something together. I'm assuming that's not the case because it would have taken a little while to actually make the shoes, but regardless, Michael did not have an all-black or predominantly black pair of the shoes ready to go for Game 3. Instead of wearing the Concords again, he wore the Nike Air Flight 1, which significantly was the signature shoe of Penny Hardaway, who was on the Magic that they were facing in that playoff series. Michael did cut off the back tab that had Penny's number 1, but it still wasn't something he wanted to do, and by the 4th game, he actually had this exact shoe in hand. It was the Space Jam colorway of the Air Jordan 11, or what we can call the black Concords, and it featured that 45 at the heel. Now, one other interesting thing to note is by the time he got this shoe and wore it for the rest of that playoff series, he wasn't actually wearing the number 45. After the first game, Nick Anderson of the Magic had a press conference quote that basically amounted to 45 isn't 23, insinuating that the Michael Jordan they were facing off against was not the same Michael Jordan who had left the NBA just a few years earlier after leading the Bulls to 3 consecutive championships. We don't know if that was the only thing that caused Michael to change his number, but we do know that after that first game, he wore 23 for the rest of the series. The Bulls were actually fined $25,000 for every time he wore that 23 jersey because you can't just like switch numbers. So that ended up being a very expensive playoff series for the Bulls, which they ended up losing in 6 games. Regardless, it built a lot of excitement around this shoe, and consumers were ready when they did end up dropping at the end of 1995. Now, one other interesting thing to note about this colorway is the fact that despite seeing it both in the movie Space Jam at the end of 1996 and on Michael's feet in the playoffs in the spring of 1995, this colorway actually did not see a retail release as one of the original pairs. We saw the Concords, the Columbia Blues, and the Breads, but these did not first release until 2000, and then they also saw a retro in 2009. Now, with all that said, that's kind of a good history overview. Let's dive into a close-up view now. We'll go through the colors, materials, and everything Nike did this year with the Air Jordan 11. Before we get into the shoe, we'll take a quick peek at the box. I always love the packaging and presentation that Nike and Jordan Brand do for the Air Jordan 11. First up, this features an outer sleeve, and this is really the one place where we see any mention of the combination of influences on this colorway between the 45 PE, you can see that 45 in a glossy black back behind, and then the 23 on top that's made up of intertwining arms of Looney Tunes characters and Monstars. Because of that, the sleeve does feature some Looney Tunes branding and like trademark information there at the back. Now if we slip the sleeve out, you've got a traditional lift-off top box. You've got the 45 right there without the 23. Concord little pull hole, and there is the box tag. If we lift this off real quick, first thing to note, you've got like a galaxy or space print tied into that Space Jam theme. Then it has the little shield inside of there with the XI. It does not have the 3 sentences we normally see though, where it's like Tinker made them shine, Mike made them fly, and you made them iconic, I believe. If we lift that off though, there are a couple different layers of paper. You've got a black layer with that 45 branding and then some white under there. And then you do have like a Concord shoe tree that was wrapped in paper inside each shoe. Setting that aside, we'll take a look at the actual shoe now. I'll kind of highlight the differences between this and some of the other releases we've seen and kind of what Nike did to get this back to OG. One of the first things you'll notice is the fact that these actually feature hits of Concord purple instead of the Varsity Royal we've seen on both retros of the Space Jam colorway. You've got the Concord right there on the heel Jumpman, the Jumpman in the middle of the tongue tag, and the herringbone traction pods on the outsole. Speaking of the Jumpman at the heel, another thing they did to bring these back to OG form is have the Jumpman, so his arm with the ball facing forward on both shoes. On other retros, we've seen the right shoe having that face forward, but then the left shoe has it face towards the rear. It's cool that they brought that back because that is a nice original touch. For the little tongue tag, this features Jumpman Jordan branding. This colorway has seen a couple different iterations of text along there. We've seen things like Space Jam for one of the pairs Michael Jordan wore when making the movie. The 2000 release, I believe, had Jumpman Jam, and there have been a couple other variations. I'm assuming the Jumpman Jordan would have been what would have been featured on the shoe for his 95 playoff PE, but again, do not know for sure. That's just kind of speculation. For the 45 at the heel, you've got that stitched on. It is not screen printed like we've seen on some of the other releases of the Jordan 11. We're back to having the original little tag inside the tongue. I know they switched things up last year for the 72 and 10, but this does say quality basketball products inspired by the greatest player ever. They also brought back Nike Air branding inside the shoe. We'll see if we can get that. So you can see that there it is in there in white. We'll take some time now to talk about the patent leather. They really focus on bringing back the original shape and look of the patent leather, so it sits much higher on the shoe than what we're used to seeing. You can also see the white line running around. That's actually the grain of the real leather they use. It's not synthetic like we've seen on a lot of other Jordan 11 retros. These also feature these interesting widow's peaks. You've got one right there. You got one on the other side. Just about knocked over my light there. And you've got one right there at the tip. Now that's something that comes from the manufacturing process, and those are basically used to help line up all of the materials, and they're normally removed before a shoe is actually released. I know some of the 95 and 96 retail pairs did feature those, although they were a lot smaller. I'm also curious, I really don't know, but I'm not sure if that relates at all to the pair that Michael Jordan would have worn in the 95 playoffs, because at that point the shoe, wasn't technically yet finalized, so it was more of like a sample for him to try out. So I could definitely see them not worrying about cutting off things like that. But again, that's just speculation. I'm not really sure. These feature leather back here around the collar, and then for the rest of the upper, you've got the Cordura nylon, or basically a ballistic mesh that was a big feature of the 11. It actually helped keep weight down and helped offset some of the added weight from the patent leather and the carbon fiber shank underneath. Midsole is white, just like what we always see. Flipping to the outsole now, you've got much more of a blue tint on the clear section, or on the translucent section, than what we've seen on other retros of the Space Jam colorway. But again, this is true to what Michael Jordan would have worn in 95 and 96. Again, you've got your two sections with herringbone traction that feature that Concord purple. And you can see below the translucent outsole, you've got that carbon fiber shank plate. That about wraps it up for the review of the Air Jordan 11. I think this video is going to end up being a little bit longer, but there was a ton of history to talk about. I think it's really cool to learn about kind of the story behind the shoe, especially when we've got that significant 45 branding back there. Definitely let me know in the comments what you think of this shoe. I don't really care whether people are calling it the Playoff BE or the Black Concords or the Space Jams. I just think it's a great shoe, and it definitely has really important ties both to those playoffs and to the movie. Let me know in the comments though what you think about that difference. Also let me know if you picked up a pair, if they were easy to get for you, all that good stuff. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed the content, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this, and as always, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.